Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea. Today I'm going to show you how to paint this Skaven Clan Rat, ideal for your games of Warhammer Age of Sigmar. So the first thing I've done is I've primed the model black, as this will give us a nice, smooth, even base coat for the rest of our colours to work from. Now the first thing I'm doing is coming in with some Dryad bark. We're going to paint this all over the wooden parts to the shield to the model. By painting this shield nice and early, it allows us to paint this in a rather messy method to give us a really good wood effect without getting paint over the rest of the miniature. So make sure you paint all of the shield with a couple of layers of Dryad bark. And after a couple of layers of Dryad bark, you can see we've built up a solid coat all over the wooden parts of that shield. So now I'm going to shade the shield with some Nuln Oil. Just going to shade this all over the parts we just painted with Dryad bark, letting it sink into all of the recesses to add some definition to that shield. And after the Nuln Oil has dried, it's seeped into all of the recesses of the wood grain and added definition to that shield. Now finally, with some Baneblade Brown, I'm going to apply this as a dry brush all over the shield so it picks up all of the raised details, leaving all the darker colours in all of the recesses, and will give us a really nice, quick wood effect all over the shield. And with that Dryad bark applied, that is the shield painted on the Skaven. So now it's time to paint the rest of the Clan Rat. So the first thing I'm doing is coming in with some Xandri dust, and I'm going to paint this all over the areas of fur to the model. So anywhere that we want to be fur texture or colour, coming in with a couple of layers of Xandri dust, building this up to a solid base coat all over these areas of the model. So it's going to be things like the face, the upper portions to all of the limbs. I'll be leaving the hands to the Skaven and the feet. I'll be leaving these unpainted. We'll be coming in with another colour later to paint these areas. Paint all of the upper parts of the limbs with some Xandri dust. And with that Xandri dust applied, that is the base coat for the fur on the Skaven painted. So now it'll be time to paint in the skin areas. For this I'm coming in with some Cadian flesh tone. And I'm going to very carefully pick out any areas that I want to be skin. So it's some areas here around his nose and his mouth, picking these out with a couple of layers of Cadian flesh tone. Also remember to pick out his tongue at this stage as well. We're also going to pick out the ears on the Skaven, give these a nice couple of coats of Cadian flesh tone as well. And that'll be the lower parts to all of the limbs, so the hands and the feet. I'm going to make sure I coat these with a couple of layers of Cadian flesh tone. And where it meets the Xandri dust, I'm going to ever so slightly feather the two colours into one another to get a nice transition between the fur and the bare skin on the Skaven. So you don't want these to be straight lines between the Xandri dust and the Cadian flesh tone. Have them a little bit scratchy, a little bit messy. This will give the impression of the fur ending and transitioning towards the skin. Cadian flesh tone applied, that's all the skin details on the model picked out. So the next thing I'm going to paint is all of the fabric on the model. For this I'm coming in with some corn red. And I'm going to apply this over all of the areas of fabric on the model. This one here has a different bit of fabric around his neck, so I'm going to leave that as the black primer for now. All of the rest of the fabric I'm going to pick out with a couple of layers of corn red. It's been really neat when I'm around areas that we've already painted, like the Zandri dust and the Cadian flesh tone. All of the rest of the parts of the fabric on the Skaven, just going to coat these with a couple of layers of corn red. Which will give us a really nice deep red colour in all of these areas of fabric and add a nice bit of contrast to all the lighter areas of skin and fur. So there is quite a lot of fabric on this model, just make sure you pick it all out with a couple of layers of corn red. With that corn red applied, the main tunic to the Skaven painted. So I'm going to pick out that little bit of additional fabric near his neck. For this, I'm coming in with some Castillan green. I'm just going to carefully apply this over the additional bit of fabric on the model. This green will give a nice contrasting colour to the red we use for the rest of the fabric. Really add some interest to this model. So once again, just take your time, pick out all the little additional bits of fabric with some Castillan green. Castillan green applied, that's the extra bit of fabric painted on the Skaven. So we time to pick out his leather belt. For the leather, I'm coming in with some Rhinox hide. I'm going to paint this all over the belt, going around his waist. It's going to be really careful around the other colours we've already painted, just making sure I pick out his belt with a couple of layers of Rhinox hide. And he's also got this little strap here on his shield as well. I'm going to pick this out with some Rhinox hide too. And with all the straps picked out, there isn't a lot of details left to pick out on this Skaven Clan Rat. The next one I'm going to pick out is with some Mournfang Brown. I'm going to paint the little bag he's got hanging on his waist. Just being really careful around all the other colours and details, just picking out this little bag with a couple of layers of Mournfang Brown. And with the bag picked out, the next thing I'm going to pick out the teeth to the Skaven. For the teeth, I'm using Ushabti bone, and I'm just going to very carefully pick out any of the teeth you can see coming from his mouth. I've been really neat around all the other colours. Just going to make sure I pick out these teeth with some Ushabti bone. I'm also going to pick out the claws on his feet and his hands at this stage. Just catching these with some Ushabti bone. And with the teeth and claws picked out, there's only one detail left to base coat on this Skaven, and that's going to be the metallics. So for these, I'm coming in with some lead belcher. I'm going to pick out any of the metallic details on the model. So this one here has got this armour on his back. I'm going to carefully pick this out with some lead belcher. Also got his sword in his hands. I'm going to pick out with a couple of layers of lead belcher as well. And finally, the Skaven symbol on his shield. I'm going to carefully pick this out with some lead belcher too. Don't forget to pick out any bits of chainmail that are on the model as well. This one's got some bits hanging down by its waist on the front and back. Pick these out with some lead belcher as well. And with all the base coats applied, the next step is going to be to shade the Clan Rat. So for the shade, I'm coming in with some Agrax Earth Shade, and I'm simply going to apply this all over the model. So you want to make sure this doesn't pull too heavily into any of the recesses, but make sure you shade all of the Clan Rat with some Agrax Earth Shade, as it will give us a really nice dark, grimy colour, which is ideal for Skaven.
If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. If you would like to support the channel and become a member, please press the join button down below.
After Agrax Earth Shade has dried, you can see it's given us a really dirty, grimy look all over our Skaven. Now I'm coming in with some Flayed One Flesh. I'm going to use this to highlight the fur. So I want to just very carefully pick out any of the raised sculpted fur details. Just apply a tiny bit of Flayed One Flesh near the tops of any of the fur details. Be really careful, just picking out the very tops and highest parts of the fur, and also on some of the flatter areas where there isn't sculpted in fur. I'm going to very carefully stipple some small spots of Flayed One Flesh. This will give the impression of fur over these flatter areas. So really take your time at this stage, keep these spots nice and small, and just pick out all of the sculpted fur details and stipple onto the flatter areas, so we get a great looking fur effect all over the Skaven. And with that Flayed One Flesh applied, you can see it's really given the impression of fur all over those areas of the model. So now it's be time to highlight the bare skin. For this, I'm coming in with Cadian Flesh Tone first. I'm going to apply it to all of the areas that the shade didn't settle on the skin. So wherever the Agrax Earth Shade's gone into one of the recesses, I'm coming in on either side with a little bit of Cadian Flesh Tone and bringing it back up to its original brighter colour. So focus this to all the raised areas, highest points, and areas that the shade didn't settle. Just bring these back up to a brighter colour with some Cadian Flesh Tone. Tail here, there are some ridges going along the tail, so I'm picking out the top half of all of these with a thin line of Cadian Flesh Tone, which will keep that banding effect going all the way down the length of the tail. And with the Cadian Flesh Tone applied, you can see it's brightened up those areas of skin. Now I'm coming in with some Kislev Flesh, and I'm going to carefully use this as an edge highlight on all the sharpest points of skin. So wherever there's a really sharp fold or edge of any raised detail, I'm just applying a small amount of Kislev Flesh onto the very edges as an edge highlight to give the impression of light catching and adding interest to these details. So just carefully apply a little bit of this Kislev Flesh on any sharp edges. And on the tail, I'm just applying this at the very top of all of those ridges, just applying a small spot of Kislev Flesh running down the top of the tail. And with the Kislev Flesh applied, that is all of the skin highlighted on the model. Next I'm going to highlight are the teeth and the claws. So for this I'll be using Screaming Skull. I'm just going to carefully pick out any of the teeth with a thin line of Screaming Skull, leaving a bit of the shaded Ushabti bone showing in the recesses. Doing the same with the claws on the feet and the hands as well, just catching these with some Screaming Skull. With the teeth and claws picked out, the only detail left to apply now on the face will be to pick out the eyes to the Skaven. For the eyes, I'm coming in with some Mephiston Red. I'm going to very carefully sink this into the recesses of the eye socket. And careful around all the fur we've already painted and highlighted. Just sinking some Mephiston Red into the recesses of those eye sockets. And with some Abaddon Black, just going to add a small vertical line in the middle of that red. This will give the impression of a pupil. And with the eyes painted, that's really added some character and given interest to the model. So now with some corn red, I'm going to start highlighting the fabric. So for this, keep it nice and thin and apply it all over the areas of fabric that the shade didn't settle. So wherever we got some Agrax shades gone into a recess, darkened it down. And coming in on either side, brighten it back up to its original colour with a layer of thinned down corn red. So you want to leave all of that shade paint showing in the recesses. On all of the larger, flatter, raised areas, bring it back up to a brighter colour with a layer of corn red. And so much of this model is fabric, it's worth taking your time at this stage, making sure you do this step nice and neat, just leaving that shade showing in all of the recesses, but brightening the rest of the fabric back up with a layer of corn red. And with that corn red applied, you can see it's brightened up those raised areas of the fabric. So next I'm coming in with a 50-50 mix of corn red and Mephiston red. And with this I'm going to be applying it in the middle of the areas that I just applied the pure corn red. So wherever we just applied some of our previous step, come into the middle of all of those areas and apply a little bit of this mix in the centre of those areas. Once again, keep this nice and thin so it allows a bit of the other colours to show through. And focus this onto the most raised points, highest edges, and towards the edges of any creases and folds. Just come through and apply a little bit of this mix in the middle of all the areas we just applied our previous layer. Mix applied, you can see how it's building up a transition on those raised areas from dark to light. So now I'm going to come in with some pure Mephiston red. I'm going to apply this once again in the middle of the areas we just applied the previous layer. So where we came through before and placed a little bit of the mix, I'm coming in now and applying a little bit of pure Mephiston red in the middle of all of these areas. So I'm now really focusing this towards the sharpest points, the most raised details, just coming in and applying a little bit of pure thin down Mephiston red in the middle of all the areas we've just been applying our previous steps. And with that Mephiston red applied, you can see how it's really brightened up those areas of the fabric. Now there's just one final step left to apply. And that's with some Evil Sun Scarlet. Just going to apply this as an edge highlight on all the sharpest points of the model. So for this I'm just tracing around the edges of all the details on the fabric, on the tops all the sharp folds and raised details. I'm just applying a small edge highlight of Evil Sun Scarlet on all of these details. This edge highlight will give the impression of light catching the sharpest points. Most raised details just really add some interest all over that fabric on the Skaven. So really take your time at this stage, just pick out all the sharpest details with a thin edge highlight of Evil Sun Scarlet. As you can see, there are a lot of folds and details on this model, so it really is worth taking your time, carefully picking all of these out to get a really great effect all over this fabric. With that edge highlight applied, you can see it's really made that fabric stand out, brightened it up and added interest all over the model. So now with some Castilian green, I'm going to highlight the little bit of fabric near his neck. So much like before, I'm applying this in all the areas that the shade didn't settle, leaving that Agrax shade in all of the recesses, brightening the rest of the fabric back up with some Castilian green. Green applied, you can see how it's brightened up those areas of fabric, but left all the detail and shade in the recesses. So now with some Strachan green, I'm just going to apply an edge highlight on all the sharpest points of this part of fabric. So keep these nice and small, nice and thin again, and just pick out the very sharpest edges of this bit of upper fabric with a layer of Strachan green. With that applied, that is all of the fabric highlighted. Next thing I'm going to highlight is the belt. For this I'm coming in with some Gorthor brown. I'm just going to carefully apply an edge highlight going around the top and the bottom of the belt, just to highlight the edges of his belt. And with the belt highlighted, there's only a few details left to highlight now on this Skaven. The next one of those will be his bag. First of all, I'm coming in with some Mournfang brown again, and I'm going to apply this once again in all the areas that the shade didn't settle. So on all of these raised surfaces where the Agrax shade didn't settle, just bringing this back up to its brighter colour with some Mournfang brown. The bag brightened back up to its brighter colour with some Scrag brown. Just going to apply a thin edge highlight to all the sharp points on the bag. So keep these really small and just pick out all the sharpest points on the bag with some Scrag brown. And with the bag highlighted, the only details left to highlight on the Skaven now are the metallics. So for this, I'm coming in with some Stormhost silver. I'm going very carefully apply an edge highlight to all of the metallic details. So just pick out a really thin line at the very edge of all the metallic details. Just pick these out with an edge highlight of Stormhost Silver. Really don't want these to become too thick, because we don't want any of the Skaven metals to look particularly shiny. But just pick out the very edges with a thin edge highlight of Stormhost Silver. Don't forget to pick out some of the links of the chainmail as well, just catching the very bottoms with a small spot of Stormhost Silver. And with that final edge highlight applied, that is how to easily paint a Skaven Clan Rat for your games of Warhammer Age of Sigmar. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please let me know in the comments down below, are there any other Age of Sigmar models you would like to see me paint? But don't forget to like and subscribe, and happy painting!